Women in our 60 Me community love to read. If there is one passion that I think many of us share, it is reading a great book. And 2019 was full of amazing publications. And I want to share with you 5 of my favorites and a couple that you may not have heard of. My name is Margaret Manning with 60Me, and I want to welcome you here today. Our show today is brought to you by International Living. Now, International Living is a company that has made it its focus to help people retire overseas. They have people on the ground in countries around the world, and they're just answering the questions that you have about some of the places that you might be considering. So check out their website, internationalliving.com/60me, and you can ask for them to send you a link to their latest report. And these reports are so informative and useful. I really recommend that you check it out. But let's go back to books, because books are, for a lot of us, the way that we learn about new places and about new things. But they're also ways that we inspire ourselves to think about the world in a different way. Now, one of our bloggers, Susan Belding, wrote her list of favorite books for 2019. Many of them are mine too. And I've got one other that I want to share with you that is my absolute favorite book of 2019. And in fact, I would probably say of every book I've ever read. It's amazing. Best book ever. So what was your best book ever? I'm sure you've got some really good ones on the tip of your tongue right now that you want to recommend. And I would advise you and just encourage you to do that. This is what this conversation is all about. What are your favorite books of the last year? Now, Susan chose one as one of her first 5 that I think a lot of you have read. I've not read it myself, to be honest, and it's just had so many amazing reviews. It's Where the Crawdads Sing. Now, this is a book written by Delia Owens. It tells the story of a young girl who was left as an orphan at the age of 8 in the woods of North Carolina, and she was raised, and the people thought she was kind of just an unusual, crazy child. But the story, they alienate her from the townspeople. But the story unfolds, and she finds love, and fame and fulfillment. And it's a wonderful story about, her evolution. But apparently it culminates in a murder trial with a twist that is totally unexpected and makes it a really fabulous read. So that's Where the Crawdads Sing. The next one that Susan recommends is The Rules of Magic. This is an interesting book. It's by Alice Hoffman, and it's a story that follows her practical magic, which tells the story of these sisters, the Owen sisters, who come from a long line of cursed women. And apparently, in the first book, there was a trial, in the Salem witch trials in 1600s, and so this book starts off with that kind of as a foundation. And now The Rules of Magic talk about these 3 young relatives who actually have to live with the tradition, the family history, and how they deal with their strange heritage. Now, it's going to be apparently an HBO special. It's quirky, it's entertaining, and Susan loves it. That's the one called The Rules of Magic. Did you read it? I'd love to know what you've read this year. I'm so excited to read your reviews or your recommendations at the end of this, because I'm always looking for good recommendations. I don't know about you too. I've actually myself personally also got into reading in the last couple of months. I'm taking time now for reading. And once you get started, I don't know about you, but I cannot stop. Once I find a good book, I'm up all hours of the night. I'm sitting on park benches, I'm on the buses, reading this book. But for me, I've rediscovered a passion. And hopefully you have as well. But the third book that Susan recommends is The Summer Wives. This is by Beatrice Williams, and it's a really interesting story about the haves and the have-nots. Now, apparently, the woman in this, the heroine or the lead in this story, comes to an island after the war, 1930 to 1960 time period covered here. She comes after the war to really mourn the loss of her father, and she joins her mother and her mother's new husband, and the kind of juxtaposition of her lifestyle and the lifestyle of those rich and famous living on the island. And of course, there's the kind of interaction with the townspeople, who are mostly fishermen. And apparently this is a really, really insightful story into this kind of story of the haves and the have-nots in this idyllic summer setting. Love, betrayal, coming of age. It's kind of all those things. And a fascinating look, Susan says, at the human condition. So that's the Summer Wives. Another one which I have started to read, I've actually got this on my Kindle, and I'm reading it. It's The City of Girls. It's by Elizabeth Gilbert, and it's Eat, Pray, Love fame. Such a hard book to follow, right? I mean, how do you do that? She's had a few books since that, but this one, City of Girls, is about a young woman. Her name's Vivian, and she lives in New York City in the 1940s. And it's a story about how she discovers the city, how she discovers herself, how she is like, all the girlfriends that she hangs out with. And also there's a quote here about how she sees life. And I think it tells you what the book is probably like, which is, Vivian says, life is both fleeting and dangerous. And there's no point in denying yourself pleasure or being anything other than what you are. I like that. So that's actually the sort of summary of the book, City of Girls. And I want to read this one because I love New York City. I was there for 3 months once on a work project, and I just didn't want to leave. I really loved it so much. It's the most fascinating city in the world, I think. Besides maybe, well, there's lots more, but it's a fascinating city. And so this book explores her life in that environment. The final one that Susan recommends is, there's 2 more, is Daisy Jones and the Six. And this is a story told through the eyes of Daisy, who is a singer. She's a young girl who has a great voice, but she joins a band, and the band just travels the world, and she has this rebellious experience, and just the coming of age again of being a singer in a band. And it so reminded me of my friend Mary, who I went to high school. Well, I didn't go to high school with her. She was in high school when I was in lower grade. She was older than me in Windsor, Ontario, when I lived there. After one of our moves, and she kind of took me in, and we had such a great friendship. And I rediscovered her 20 years ago in Las Vegas, and we've kept in touch on Facebook ever since. But she was a singer, and she is a singer, and she's a wonderful singer, but had a similar interesting life story. So that was kind of fun. Daisy Jones and the Six. That's the band. And then the final one that Susan recommends, is The Giver of Stars. This is a really interesting book, and I'm really tempted to read this one. It's set in Kentucky in the 1940s. And I didn't know this, but Eleanor Roosevelt created this group called the Pack Horse Libraries. And these were women that they hired to actually ride around the country on horses, delivering and picking up books. What a cool thing. I didn't know about this. Did you? It's the Pack Horse Libraries. And it was about rebuilding America after the Great Depression. And of course, books are the way you do this. You inspire, you educate, you motivate. And so the story is this woman, Alice, who's just married the son of a local mine owner, and, just not having a terribly good time with her marriage. And she becomes a pack horse, library person, or I don't know what the story exactly, what her role is, but it's gripping, it's exciting. And it's her and 4 other women who are living their lives during this rebuilding period in the United States history. It's called The Giver of Stars, Jojo Moyes. She's apparently a very well-known author. I don't know her, but Jojo Moyes. So those are the ones that Susan has recommended. And the one that I'm going to recommend, drum roll. Now, many of you read this book. I know you did, because every time I went onto Facebook in the last year, I saw someone reading this book. It's called A Gentleman in Moscow. It's written by Amor Towles, Towles, Amor Towles. It's remarkable. It's just remarkable. It's a incredible book. It's a story about Count Alexander Rostov and his imprisonment, really, at the Metropole Hotel in Russia. And it's his story of his life in that setting. And it's a great book about Russian history, but it's also just an amazingly well-written, hypnotic, compelling, addictive book. It's one of the few books that I've bought the paperback, because I actually wanted to be able to read it and go back and forward. And I have it on my Kindle, but I just had to have it in hard copy. I'll probably read this again many times in my life, but Gentleman in Moscow. And finally, there's one more I've got to tell you about this book. It's one that I just finished reading. It's called The Silent Patient. It's a thriller. It's a psychological thriller. I have never read a psychological thriller in my life, but I'm totally enchanted by the idea of them. Some can be quite gruesome. Some can be quite violent and, to do with unsolved murders and mysteries. But this one is more of a psychological thriller. It's called The Silent Patient. It's by Alex Michaelides. And you might enjoy that one too. I'm inspired to write a book now on a psychological thriller. I've got an idea. You probably do too. Most people who like to read are interested in writing too. So I'd love to hear your suggestions, your recommendations for books. Let's have a little chat about what's out there in your world and what you're reading, what you're loving, and let's start a conversation. Thanks everybody for being here. I really appreciate your time, and especially on this topic. It's one of my passions, and look forward to hearing your comments and your feedback, recommendations, and sharing more with you in the future. Take good care, everybody. Bye-bye for now.